Good day, and welcome back to the Dragon's Lair. My name is Cavill, and today we are going to be talking about one of my more controversial opinions, a fan theory of mine which is supported in the books. Today's topic, Severus Snape, greater than Dumbledore. In my mind, Severus Snape is probably one of the greatest wizards of the wizarding world. And when he's put up against such juggernauts as Dumbledore and Lord Voldemort, you might be wondering, Cavill, why do you think that? Well, do I have some news for you? Today on the podcast, we're exploring exactly that. So, without further ado, feel free to go get yourself a snack or something to drink, settle in, and enjoy as I discuss the reasons why I think Severus Snape is the greatest wizard of the wizarding world. Imagine, if you will, a torchlit corridor in the heart of Hogwarts. The air is thick with the smell of ozone and ancient stone. Standing at one end is Minerva McGonagall, arguably one of the most powerful witches of the century. She isn't just casting spells. She's weaving a storm of fire and steel. She transforms the very air into silver daggers, hurtling them with lethal intent at the man standing before her. And that man? He doesn't even draw a breath of panic. Severus Snape holds his ground. He doesn't just block, he parries. He animates a suit of armor that catches those daggers in its breast. And then the door bursts open. Phileas Flitwick, former dueling champion, and Pomona Sprout, a master of herbology, join the fray. Snape is now facing 3 department heads, 3 masters, 3 of the most formidable magical minds in Great Britain. And what does he do? He doesn't surrender. He doesn't die. He doesn't even break his cover. He holds them off just long enough to perform a feat of magic previously thought to be the exclusive domain of Lord Voldemort. He leaps through a window and takes flight, unsupported, wandless, in the air, escaping into the night. In the film, we see Snape duel Minerva in the Great Hall and deflect her spells into the Carrows, a pair of sadistic Death Eaters, before he takes flight. Most readers see this as a villain's cowardly retreat. But if you look closer, if you look at the metrics of that moment, you are witnessing the single most impressive display of magical combat in the entire 7-book saga. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we aren't just talking about a potions master or a greasy git from the dungeons. We are talking about the man who, by every objective measure of magical theory, is the greatest wizard of the modern age. When we talk about greatness in the wizarding world, we usually look at the poles. On one end, you have Albus Dumbledore, the Philosopher King, a man of ancient wisdom and a century of experience. On the other, you have Lord Voldemort, the Dark Innovator, the man who pushed the boundaries of lethality and immortality. But Severus Snape exists in the asymmetry. He didn't have Dumbledore's resources or Voldemort's lack of a conscience. He grew up in the blighted poverty of Spinner's End, in a house overflowing with books, because books were the only thing that didn't judge his pedigree. He was the dispossessed heir who entered Hogwarts as a social outcast and left as a pioneer. Today, I'm going to argue that Snape wasn't just a powerful wizard, he was a primary source of magic. We're going to look at the Half-Blood Prince as a scientific revolutionary, the boy who looked at the official textbooks and decided they weren't good enough, rewriting the laws of alchemy in the margins of a second-hand book. We're going to dissect the library of Spinner's End and how a muggle-born upbringing gave him a weapon that most wizards lack: cold, hard logic. We're going to explore the triple agent trope, the psychological endurance required to lie to the world's greatest legilimens for 17 years. That isn't just a plot point. It's a feat of collective occlumency that borders on the divine. And finally, we're going to look at the lethality handicap. We're going to talk about why fighting for a tactical draw, protecting your enemies while appearing to serve a monster, is a higher level of magic than anything Voldemort ever achieved with the killing curse. He was a linguist, an inventor, a duelist, a scientist, and a martyr. So put down your copies of Advanced Potion Making. Today, we're reading between the lines. This is the case for Severus Snape, the Half-Blood Prince and the greatest wizard of the age. Imagine a street where houses are hunched together like bruised ribs. The air tastes of coal dust and stagnant river water. This is Spinner's End, a place where the sun seems to lose its strength before it hits the pavement. Inside one of these cramped brick houses, a boy sits in a room where the walls are entirely covered with in books. Not just any books, data, knowledge, escape. Outside, his father Tobias, a muggle of hard edges and bitter silences, represents the crushing weight of the mundane. Inside, his mother, Eileen Prince, whispers of a world where blood isn't just red, it's magic. But today, we're not just looking at a boy from a blighted neighborhood. We are looking at 1/3 of a foundational triad. In the history of Hogwarts, there are 3 wizards that define the modern age. 3 boys that came from nothing. 3 half-bloods who were unloved, unwanted, and underestimated. Tom Riddle, Harry Potter, and Severus Snape. All 3 shared a common tragedy, a home that was a cage. For Tom, it was the sterile, loveless orphanage. For Harry, it was the cupboard under the stairs. And for Severus, it was the industrial rot of Spinner's End. For these 3, Hogwarts wasn't just a school. It was a sanctuary. It was the first place that told them that they weren't wrong. They were powerful. Today, we go back to the beginning. Before the Potions Master, before the Triple Agent, there was the boy who found his home in the shadows of the castle. So let's talk about the trope of the dispossessed heir. Severus Snape is a prince by name and by blood, but a pauper by circumstance. This creates a specific kind of psychological hunger. Unlike James Potter, who was born into a golden cradle, Snape was born into a pincer movement. He lived between 2 worlds and belonged to neither. To his muggle father, he was a freak, a reminder of a world Tobias couldn't control. To the pureblood wizards he would eventually meet, he was a half-blood, a diluted version of their supposed greatness. But this in-between status is exactly what gave Snape his edge. Harry used his outsider status to stay humble. Tom Riddle used it to fuel a god complex. But Snape used it to become a polymath. Because he grew up in the grey reality of a muggle mill town, he understood logic. He understood that things have to work. Magic wasn't just a sparkle to him. It was a system to be mastered. His home at Spinner's End was a library of necessity. When you have no friends, you have facts. When you have no power, you have information. This is where the hermit genius was born. Before he ever stepped onto the Hogwarts Express, Severus Snape was already more magically literate than most seventh years. He didn't just want to learn magic, he wanted to use it to rewrite the script of his own life. Now imagine the 1st of September, 1971. Severus Snape steps onto platform 9 3/4. He's wearing mismatched clothes, his hair is long and lank, and he's clutching the hand of the only person that makes the world bearable, Lily Evans. For Snape, the Hogwarts Express wasn't just a train, it was an exodus. When he sees the castle for the first time, he doesn't just see a school. He sees a sanctuary. He sees a place where his poverty doesn't matter as much as his proficiency. Like Harry and Tom before him, the moment Snape walks through those oak doors, he decides he is never truly going home again. Hogwarts is his home. But it is here where the paths of our three half-bloods diverge. Harry found a family in Gryffindor. Tom found a cult in Slytherin. Severus found a crucible. The great tragedy of Snape's arrival is that the very place that was supposed to save him, the home that he craved, immediately became a battlefield. That brings us to the sorting ceremony. In narrative terms, this is the fall from grace. Snape sits on that stool, and the hat shouts, "Slytherin!" Across the hall, Lily is sent to Gryffindor. In that single moment, the sanctuary of Hogwarts becomes a divided kingdom. Snape is cast into a den of radicalization. He's an impoverished half-blood in a house that worships wealth and purity. This leads us to the trope of the mirror protagonist. James Potter and Sirius Black are the light mirrors to Snape's dark. They are everything he isn't. Loud, popular, protected. The bullying he endured in those first years wasn't just kids being kids. It was an asymmetrical war. Snape was one person being hunted by a pack of 4. It is the origin of his tactical reflexes. While other students were enjoying the wonder of Hogwarts, Snape was learning to navigate the hallways like a guerrilla fighter. He had to develop a level of vigilance that Tom Riddle and Harry Potter never had to master so young. Tom was a predator from day one, and Harry was the chosen one. Snape had nothing but his own mind. He had to become smarter, faster, and more ruthless just to keep his head above water. Let's start with a trope that we all know, the schoolyard rivalry. But in the case of Snape and the Marauders, rivalry is a sanitized word. What we're actually looking at is an asymmetrical arms race. Imagine being 11 years old. You arrive at Hogwarts. You are brilliant, yes, but you are poor. Your robes are too short. Your hair is greasy because you come from a house without hot water, and you carry the visible weight of a blighted upbringing. Across the aisle, you have James Potter and Sirius Black. They are the Golden Boys. They're wealthy. They're handsome. They're naturally athletic. And they're backed by centuries of pure-blood social capital. In any other story, this is a simple bully versus victim dynamic. But because this is Snape, it becomes a crucible. James and Sirius were geniuses. Let's not take that away from them. They became animagi at 15. They mapped the entire castle. But they were geniuses of leisure. They used their brilliance for mischief and ego. Snape was a genius of survival. When you're one person being hunted by a pack of 4 highly talented, coordinated magical prodigies, you don't just learn to defend yourself. You have to innovate. You have to develop reflexes that are smarter than theirs. You have to learn to cast without speaking, because a split-second incantation is a split second where Sirius Black can hex you from behind. This is where Snape's non-verbal mastery begins. While other students were practicing Wingardium Leviosa, Snape was perfecting the art of the countercurse before his opponents could even finish their first syllable. He wasn't just a student. He was a combatant in a 7-year war. This is the origin of his neural speed. That terrifyingly fast processing power we later see in his duel with McGonagall. The Marauders didn't just bully him. They unintentionally built the world's most dangerous duelist. At this point, we have to dive deeper into the Hogwarts cohort that spanned from 1971 to 1978. But to truly understand why Severus Snape became the tactical titan, we have to look at the people sitting in the desks next to him. This wasn't just a school year. It was a golden age. Imagine a single generation that produced the Marauders, a 12-owl genius like Barty Crouch Jr., a charms prodigy like Lily Evans, and the other founding members of the Death Eater Inner Circle. It was an era where the standard for greatness was set so high that if you weren't a genius by 15, you were a victim. Let's start with the benchmark. James Potter and Sirius Black. In narrative terms, these are the untouchable aristocrats. They were born with everything: wealth, looks, and a terrifying level of natural talent. By their 5th year, they had achieved something that most adult wizards never attempt: the Animagi transformation. Think about the technical complexity of that. It's a multi-stage process involving linguistics, advanced transfiguration, and a month of holding a mandrake leaf in your mouth. It's a high-wire magic without a net. But they didn't do it for the grade. They did it for a friend. They also created the Marauders map, which is essentially a sentient, localized piece of god-tier tracking magic. When your rivals can turn into animals and track your every move on a magical GPS, you can't afford to be average. Snape had to develop counter-surveillance magic. He had to learn how to mask his presence and his mind. The Marauders were lords of the castle, and their sheer brilliance forced Snape to become a ghost in the machine. He didn't just study defense against the Dark Arts. He studied them. He became a master of the long game because he was being hunted by the most talented pack of predators Hogwarts had seen in a century. Think about the prodigy trope. James and Sirius weren't just schoolyard bullies. They were the magical elite. James Potter was a master of combat transfiguration. Sirius Black possessed an intensity of raw magical power. Sirius wasn't just fast, he was powerful. Remus Lupin was a technical expert. He had a deep intuitive grasp of the defense against the dark arts. He was the conscience of the group. And finally, Peter Pettigrew. Now, compared to James and Sirius, Peter doesn't seem to fit in, but he was truly an infiltration specialist. His talent lay in being overlooked, which is a different kind of magical mastery. This was the group that Snape was up against. 4 against 1. They had wealth, they had confidence, they had the leisure of privilege. They could spend their time playing with maps and sneaking out because they didn't have to worry about their future. It was already written. Snape had to fight for every inch of his status. On the other side, you had the aristocracy of the Slytherin elite. When Snape entered Slytherin, he wasn't just joining a house. He was entering a pre-war cabinet. Look at his upperclassmen and his peers. You have Bellatrix Black. In narrative terms, Bellatrix is the lethal standard. She didn't just study the dark arts. She embraced them. Her greatness was raw, chaotic, and terrifyingly efficient. She was the duelist who didn't care about the rules, only results. For Snape, Bellatrix represented a ceiling of power. To be relevant in Slytherin, he had to stand in a room with her without flinching. He had to learn how to counter the kind of erratic, high-velocity violence she specialized in. Bellatrix taught him the aesthetics of fear. And then you've got Regulus Black. He was the perfect son. A seeker, a prefect, a boy who looked like a poster child for pure-blood excellence. Regulus represented the quiet prodigy. His eventual infiltration of Voldemort's cave proves he had the high-level understanding of ancient protective magic. Snape was watching these people daily, learning the nuances of old magic that weren't in the standard curriculum. We often think of Lucius Malfoy as just a rich bully. But in the 70s, Lucius was the social North Star. When Snape arrived as a spidery boy in hand-me-down clothes, Lucius, then a prefect, was the first to welcome him. This is the trope of the patron and the protege. Lucius's talent wasn't just in his wand. It was in his social connections. He knew how to manipulate the faculty, how to move through the ministry, and how to weaponize his influence. Snape learned the Mask of Poise from Malfoy. He learned that power isn't just about winning a duel. It's about controlling a room before the wand is even drawn. This is the origin of the dungeon persona that Snape took. That cold, unflappable authority that even the most rebellious Gryffindors feared. He took Lucius's high-born arrogance and translated it into intellectual authority. If we want to talk about raw brain power, we have to talk about the man who matched Hermione Granger's academic record decades before she was born, Barty Crouch Jr. Barty Crouch Jr. earned 12 owls. He was a polymath. But where Snape was a creator, Barty was an impersonator. He had a genius for mimicry and acting magic. Think about it. He successfully fooled Albus Dumbledore for an entire year while pretending to be Mad-Eye Moody. This is the trope of the Dark Mirror. Snape and Barty were the two brightest dark minds of their generation, while the Marauders were playing pranks. Snape and Crouch were likely engaged in an intellectual arms race. Barty specialized in social stealth, where Snape specialized in fundamental chemistry. Being in the same orbit as a mind like Crouch's meant that Snape could never rest. He had to be smarter, more inventive, and more discreet. This peer-level pressure is what pushed Snape to eventually start inventing his own spells. He couldn't just be good. He had to be original to stay ahead of a genius like Barty. Here's the philosophical kicker. Snape was the only one in that entire group who had nothing to lose. James had his fortune. Sirius had his rebellion. Lucius had his name. Bellatrix had her bloodline. Snape had zero social safety. He was the scholar of the gutter. Philosophically, this is the radicalization of the meritocrat. In a world where everyone was born with a silver spoon, even the dark ones, Snape had to earn his seat at the table through absolute competence. He looked at the Marauders' innovation, Bellatrix's lethality, Lucius's poise, and Crouch's academic perfection, and he synthesized them. He became the Half-Blood Prince by taking the best and the worst parts of his entire generation and refining them. By the time they graduated in 1978, the Golden Age wizards were all specialists. James was a leader. Sirius was a duelist. Barty was an actor, and Lucius was a politician. But Severus, he was a generalist. He was the only one who could do it all. And that is why, when the war finally began, he was the only one that Voldemort and Dumbledore both considered indispensable. Now let's look at the philosophy of the Half-Blood Prince. There is a profound trope at play here. The dispossessed heir. Snape is a prince by blood, but he is a pauper by circumstance. In the 1970s, the Slytherin common room was a snake pit of radicalization. You had the future inner circle of Death Eaters, Lucius Malfoy, Bellatrix Black, Avery, Mulciber. For these people, greatness was an inheritance. It was in the blood. But Snape knew blood was a lie. He saw his muggle father Tobias and his magical mother, and he realized that power isn't a gift, it's construction. This is why he rewrote the potion books. Think about the ego required to do that. 16-year-old boy looks at a textbook written by a master and says, "This is inefficient." He scratches out the instructions and writes his own. He engages in alchemical rebellion. He wasn't just learning magic, he was correcting it. Philosophically, this places Snape in the camp of the existentialist. While purebloods believed their essence preceded their existence, that they were born great, Snape believed that existence preceded essence. He would make himself a prince through the sheer force of his intellect. He didn't want to follow the old ways of the purebloods. He wanted to find a better way, a faster way, a more lethal way. We cannot talk about the 1970s, though, without talking about Lily Evans. We're going back to Sev. To understand why Severus Snape became the most formidable wizard of his age, you have to understand the only thing that ever made him human. You have to understand the Lily Collection, that fragile, impossible bridge between a Slytherin boy with a blighted home and a Gryffindor girl who tasted like sunlight. This is the story of the moment the prince murdered the boy. Imagine Hogwarts in 1971. The wizarding world is teetering on the edge of a civil war. Lord Voldemort is a rising shadow, and his ideology is being spread through pureblood families like a virus. In this environment, the friendship between Severus Snape and Lily Evans wasn't just a childhood bond, it was a radical anomaly. In the books, we get glimpses of this. The memories of them sitting by the river in Cokeworth, the secret smiles in the library, the shared notes on charms. This is the trope of the sanctuary, of the outcast. For those first few years, Snape and Lily likely spent more time together than the Marauders did. Think about it. Snape was an outcast in his own... Think about it. Snape was an outcast in his own house. The poor boy among the Malfoys and the Blacks. Lily was a muggle-born in a house that prized bravery but practiced exclusion. They found each other in the gaps, in the library, in the quiet corners of the grounds. Philosophically, this was their shared intellectual sovereignty. They were the two brightest students of the year. While James Potter was showing off on a broom, Snape and Lily were likely discussing the theoretical limits of transfiguration. To Lily, he wasn't just the greasy git or the Death Eater in training. He was just Sev. He was the boy who told her she was special when the world told her she was a freak. This version of Snape, the Sev, was the only time he was ever truly integrated. He didn't have to be a Slytherin. He didn't have to be a prince. He just had to be. But the tragedy of Severus is the trope of the inescapable environment. While Snape was Sev with Lily, he was Snape in the Slytherin common room, and that room was a nightmare of rancid whispers. Enter Mulciber and Avery. In narrative terms, these two represent peer pressure. They were the radicals. They were the ones talking about purity, about the Dark Lord, about the New Order. To them, Snape was a prize, a brilliant mind that needed to be cleansed of its muggle-born attachments. Imagine every time Snape sat down at the Slytherin table to hear the whispers. "Why are you with her, Severus? She's a mudblood. You're one of us, aren't you?" Imagine the social pressure on Severus at the time. On one side, he had the girl that represented his heart, and on the other, he had a house that represented his only chance at power and protection in a world that hated him for being poor. Snape began to lead a double life long before he ever met Dumbledore. He was performing a social masquerade. He tried to please the radicals by experimenting with the dark arts, hoping that they wouldn't notice he was still meeting with Lily in the library. He was trying to ride two horses, but as any rider will tell you, that eventually leads to a fall. There's a crucial moment in the books, a memory Lily brings up. She asks Snape about what Mulciber did to a fellow student, Mary MacDonald. Snape dismisses it as just a laugh. This is a devastating look into normalizing atrocity. To keep his status in Slytherin, Snape had to pretend that the cruelty of his peers was just a joke. He had to develop a callous exterior. He was trying to justify the unjustifiable, because he was terrified of being the next victim. Lily saw through it. She saw the Sev she loved being swallowed by the Snape the Slytherins wanted. The tension was building like a pressure cooker, and the Slytherin influence was growing. And then came the lake. We all know the scene. James Potter hangs Snape upside down. He humiliates him. He exposes him. But we have to look at Snape's thoughts at that moment. Snape is at his absolute lowest. He's physically vulnerable. His privacy is gone, and he's being mocked by his greatest rival. And who comes to save him? Lily. In any other story, this is a moment of salvation. But for a boy raised in a house of domestic violence, a boy who has spent 5 years trying to prove to the radicals he is a powerful prince, being saved by a mudblood girl in front of the entire school is an ultimate ego death. When he calls her a mudblood, it isn't an act of hate. It's a panic response. He inflicts the wound on himself. And in one split second, the rancid whispers of Mulciber and Avery won. He used the only weapon he had to reclaim his dignity, the language of his oppressors. He struck out at the one person he loved most, because she was the one... He struck out at the one person he loved, because she was the only one who could truly hurt him by seeing him as he was, weak. He didn't just lose Lily in that moment, he murdered Sev. He walked away from that lake and fully embraced the prince. He decided that if love made him weak, he would choose power. This is the core of Snape's greatness and his tragedy. It's the cost of belonging. Severus was a boy who wanted to belong in two worlds, the world of Lily's light and the world of Slytherin's power. But in the golden age of 1971 to 1978, you cannot have both. This gave Snape existential despair. He realized the world doesn't care about your intentions, it cares only about your actions. He spent the rest of his life trying to undo that one word. He spent the next 20 years trying to find Sev again, but Sev died on the grass by the lake. When we look at the greatest wizard, we have to acknowledge that his power was built on the foundation of a shattered identity. He became the most disciplined occlumens in the world, because he had to hide the Sev part of his soul so deeply that even he couldn't find it. Let's get technical though for a moment. During those 7 years, Snape created magic. The ultimate intellectual flex. He was a magical physicist who discovered a new fundamental particle, creating spells like Sectum Sempra, a sword made of magic. While others were using Stupefy to knock people out, Snape was creating a spell for enemies. It reflects the violence of his environment. Look at Muffliato. It's a spell that fills the ears of nearby people with an unidentifiable buzzing, so you can have private conversations. Think about the psychology of privacy there. Snape lived in a world where he was constantly watched, constantly mocked, and constantly under threat. He didn't just invent combat spells. He invented space. He used magic to carve out a world where he could finally be alone with his thoughts. This leads us to the ultimate realization about Snape's time at Hogwarts. He was the only student who was actually self-taught. Dumbledore had mentors. Voldemort had Slughorn's favoritism. Snape had a library and a grudge. He didn't just graduate from Hogwarts. He transcended it. Many of his other spells, like Levicorpus and Langlock, weren't dark spells by nature. They were functionalist. He needed spells to give him privacy. He needed spells like Levicorpus to ensure a non-lethal way of neutralizing opponents. Snape was a linguistic architect. While James Potter was using the map to explore the castle, Snape was using language to explore the very boundaries of what magic could do. He wasn't just a student of the dark arts. He was a lexicographer. As we close this look at the golden age of the 1970s, we have to ask ourselves, is greatness born of suffering? Snape is the poster child of the cruel mentor and the Byronic hero. He's mad, he's bad, and he's dangerous to know. But his greatness is inseparable from his trauma. If James Potter hadn't bullied him, would he have become a master of non-verbal casting? If he hadn't grown up in poverty, would he have felt the need to rewrite potions books? His time at Hogwarts was a battle for the soul of the wizarding world. James, Sirius, and Lily represented the status quo of natural talent. Snape represented the radicalization of the intellectual. He's the reminder that magic isn't just about wands and words, it's about will, the Nietzschean will to power. He willed himself out of Spinner's End. He willed himself into the inner circle of the Dark Lord, and he willed himself into the confidence of Albus Dumbledore. By the time he graduated in 1978, Snape was no longer just a boy. He was a weapon that had been sharpened by the Marauders, tempered by the Slytherins, and fueled by a love he had just destroyed. He was 21 years old. He was already the most dangerous man in the room. He just didn't want anyone to know it yet. We'll move beyond the early life and move into the mind of Severus Snape. If we really want to understand why Severus Snape is the greatest wizard of his age, you need to stop looking at his wand and start looking at his margins. Most wizards are consumers of magic. They buy their books at Flourish and Blots. They follow the instructions. They get the expected results. They are the magical technicians. Severus Snape was a magical architect. He didn't just want to know how a potion worked. He wanted to know why the masters were wrong. Let's start with a physical object, a second-hand copy of Advanced Potion Making by Libatius Borage. In the wizarding world, Borage is the gold standard. He's the authority. But if you open up Snape's copy, the official text is almost unreadable. It's covered in cramped, spiky handwriting. This is the trope of the marginalia genius. Think about the sheer, unadulterated ego of a 16-year-old boy looking at a centuries-old brewing process and saying, "This is inefficient," while Horace Slughorn, a master in his own right, is teaching the traditionalist method. Snape is practicing forensic alchemy. He realizes that by crushing a soporiferous bean with the flat of a silver blade releases more juice than cutting it. It sounds like a small detail, doesn't it? But in the world of high-level potions, that's the difference between a life-saving antidote and a lethal poison. This brings us to a crucial comparison. Severus Snape versus Hermione Granger. Hermione Granger is the ultimate student, an academic paragon. If a book says it, she masters it. But Snape is the ideal experimentalist. He doesn't respect the book. He respects the result. He represents an epistemological break from the magic that has been taught for 1,000 years. He was a teenager conducting R&D in the back of a classroom, proving that magic isn't a fixed set of rules. It's a fluid science, waiting for someone brave enough to rewrite it. Let's look at a moment that most people overlook in the Philosopher's Stone. To protect the stone, the teachers set up a gauntlet. Flitwick uses charms. McGonagall uses transfiguration. Sprout uses herbology. These are all displays of raw magical power. But Snape sets a logic puzzle. 7 bottles, a riddle, and a wall of fire. Hermione famously says, "Many of the greatest wizards haven't got an ounce of logic." And she's right. In a world where you can wave a stick and make things disappear, the cause and effect muscles of the brain tend to atrophy. Snape's greatness came from his hybridity. Because he grew up in the Muggle world of Spinner's End, he possessed the Muggle grit of logical deduction. He knew that the mind is a more versatile weapon than the wand. Philosophically, this makes him a rationalist in a world of mystics. He didn't rely on the wonder of magic. He relied on its mechanics. He designed a trap that would stop a wizard like Voldemort, someone who thinks in terms of absolute power, because Voldemort would likely find a logic puzzle beneath his dignity. Snape weaponized the one thing the wizarding elite lacked: common sense. Now we have to address the elephant in the room, or the dungeon, the pedagogy of cruelty. If you look at Severus Snape through the lens of a modern educator, he's a disaster. He's biased, he's cutting, and, at times, borderline abusive. We aren't here to condone his behaviour. It is a moral failing. But if we look at it through the lens of narrative function, Snape is performing a brutal, high-stakes form of stress inoculation. Think about his most famous target, Hermione Granger. The brightest witch of her age, was the ultimate academic paragon. But she was a creature of the library. If a fact was printed in a textbook, it was gospel. But Snape saw a flaw in that brilliance, a rigidity. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when he famously snaps at her for being a tiresome know-it-all, he isn't just being a bully. He's attacking her reliance on authority. By mocking her for rote memorization, he was inadvertently, or perhaps very intentionally, forcing her to move beyond the text. He was pushing her to develop her intuition. Look at how Hermione evolves. In the first year, she solves his logic puzzle. not by casting a spell, but by using the Muggle logic Snape himself championed. Later, in The Half-Blood Prince, she is the one most frustrated by the prince's notes, because they work better than the official instructions. Snape's constant friction forced Hermione to stop being just a student and start becoming a strategist. He provided the adversarial environment that taught her that in the real world, knowing the answer isn't enough. You have to be able to apply it while somebody is trying to break you. There is a detail in the books that is easy to miss, because it's so consistent. In 6 years of potions classes, Severus Snape almost never tells his students to open a textbook. Think about that. In every subject, charms, transfiguration, herbology, the students are tethered to their textbooks. But when you walk into Snape's dungeon, the ritual is always the same. He waves his wand, and the instructions simply appear on the blackboard. This isn't just a stylistic choice, it's a statement of his intellectual mastery. In The Half-Blood Prince, we finally see the source code for those blackboard instructions. When Harry starts using Snape's old copy of Advanced Potion Making, he realizes the official instructions, the ones Libatius Borage wrote and the Ministry approved, are inferior. Harry follows the prince, and he produces a potion so perfect it shocks even Horace Slughorn. Snape wasn't just teaching his students the curriculum, he was teaching them his corrections. He was a living lexicon. He had reached a level of mastery where the textbook was no longer a guide. It was an obstacle. By putting his own instructions on the board, he was practicing a form of academic subversion. He was saying to his students, don't trust the authorities, trust me, trust the process. Philosophically, this reveals Snape's forensic relationship with magic. Most wizards view a potion as a recipe, a bit like baking a cake. If you follow the steps, you get the result. But Snape viewed a potion as chemical negotiation. He understood the why behind the how. He knew that by crushing the beans released juices more effectively than cutting it, because he understood the structure of magical plants. He was a master craftsman, a master chef who never looked at a recipe card, because he understood the soul of the ingredients. Snape was operating on a plane of existence where he was the primary source. And here's the kicker. By forcing his students to look at the blackboard instead of their books, he was forcing them into a state of active vigilance. You couldn't pre-read Snape's lesson. You had to be present in the room, watching the chalk move. He was commanding their attention and ensuring for 90 minutes the only reality that mattered was the one he was creating on the blackboard. You might be wondering, why was he so obsessed with this kind of pressure? Because Severus Snape was the only person in the castle that knew what was coming. When Snape walked into a classroom, he wasn't seeing children. He was seeing future soldiers, and he knew the enemy better than anyone. Snape had spent years in the inner circle of the Death Eaters. He had stood in the same room as Bellatrix Lestrange, a woman who treats the Cruciatus curse like a conversation starter. He had seen Antonin Dolohov, a wizard who invented his own silent, internal bleeding curses. He knew the Death Eaters didn't care about fair play or dueling etiquette. To Snape, standard Hogwarts education was too soft. When he mocks Neville Longbottom for a melted cauldron, he isn't just being mean to the shy boy. In Snape's mind, Neville's incompetence is a death sentence. If you can't brew a cure for boils under the gaze of a grumpy teacher, how are you going to brew a blood-replenishing potion on a battlefield while your friends are dying around you? He was a veteran mentor. Snape practiced a form of tough love, given it had been twisted by his own trauma. He viewed the dark arts not as a school subject, but as an ever-changing, evolving monster. As a contrast, Horace Slughorn taught potions as a way to gain influence and eat candied pineapple. The reality was Snape taught potions as a forensic defense. He knew the Death Eaters were ruthless because he was one of them. Voldemort would not hesitate to kill a child for a minor mistake. Therefore, Snape's classroom became a simulated war zone. He became the boggart because he wanted his students to experience fear in a controlled environment before they had to face the real thing. He didn't want them to be happy. He needed them to be hard. We've talked about Snape as a teacher, but there's a third role he plays which is arguably his most impressive. The forensic sentinel. Most teachers at Hogwarts see their classrooms as rooms. Snape saw his dungeon as a sensory map. In Goblet of Fire, Snape famously corners Harry and accuses him of stealing from his private stores. He lists the ingredients with the precision of a prosecutor. Boomslang skin, bicorn horn. To a regular student, these are just weird names. To a master potioneer, these are the fingerprints of a crime. Snape didn't need to see the cauldron to know what was happening in the castle. He knew his inventory so intimately that he could work backwards from a missing ounce of powder to the exact illegal potion being brewed. He knew somebody was making Polyjuice Potion long before the truth about Mad-Eye Moody came out. Like Sherlock Holmes, observing the type of mud on a boot, Snape observed the stoichiometry of subversion. Think about the mental energy required for this. Most students are barely aware if their student has an extra parchment. Snape, however, maintained a constant live feed of his supply chain. Why? Because in his world, the world of Death Eaters and spies, ingredients are weapons. Missing gillyweed, someone is planning an underwater heist. Missing boomslang skin, someone is planning an identity theft. When he threatens Harry with Veritaserum, it isn't just an empty cruelty. It's a manifestation of his spy vigilance. He knows that in a war, the first sign of attack isn't a spell, it's a missing chemical. There is a tragic irony here. Snape spent the entirety of Goblet of Fire suspecting Harry of stealing those ingredients, because Harry had done it in his second year. Snape's memory is a trap. He never forgets a pattern. But because he was so focused on Harry, the true enemy, Barty Crouch Jr., was able to operate in the periphery. However, the fact remains, Snape was the only person in the entire castle that knew something was wrong. Dumbledore didn't notice, McGonagall didn't notice. Snape was the castle's alarm system. He understood that magic has a physical footprint. You can hide your face with a potion, but you can't hide the fact the ingredients had to come from somewhere. This reinforces our thesis. Snape is the greatest because he's the most complete. He doesn't just rely on his wand. He relies on his data. He is a scientist in a world of dreamers, and his ability to track the forensics of magic made him the most dangerous man to try to lie to. He knew you were coming because he knew what you needed to get there. He didn't just watch the students. This leads us to a profound philosophical question. Can you teach someone to be a hero through cruelty? Snape is the embodiment of the adversarial mentor. He is the whetstone that the Gryffindors sharpen themselves against. Harry, Ron, and Hermione's greatest moments of tactical brilliance often mirror Snape's own style. They became secretive, they became efficient, and they learned to operate in the grey areas. Snape knew that the coming war wouldn't be won by people who followed the rules. It would be won by people who knew how to brew Polyjuice Potion in a bathroom, who knew how to steal from a master's stores, and people who knew how to keep their heads while the world was screaming. He was a man who had seen the worst of humanity, the raw, unfiltered ruthlessness of the Death Eaters, and he used his own reputation as a villain to build a shield around his students. He allowed them to hate him so that they would be strong enough to survive the people who actually meant them harm. Snape, in my mind, was the greatest wizard because he was a man who spoke the language of magic that nobody else understood. When he looked at a potion, he didn't see a recipe. He saw a symphony of chemical reactions. He looked at a spell. He saw a mathematical equation. His intellect was his armor, but it was also his cage. It made him superior, but it also made him alien. In the end of the day, Severus Snape's greatest invention wasn't Sectum Sempra, or a faster way to brew the drought of living death. His greatest invention was himself. He took the broken pieces of a half-blood boy, and through sheer intellectual willpower, assembled a master. But being the smartest man in the room isn't enough when you're standing in front of the world's greatest monster. How do you hide a soul? How do you lie to a god? Now, we enter the most dangerous territory of all. We aren't talking about potions or spells. We're talking about the war of the mind. If you want to understand the true scale of Severus Snape's greatness, you have to look at the 17-year lie. This isn't just about keeping a secret. It's about a man who lived his entire adult life in a fortress of his own making, standing inches away from a godlike entity who could peel back a human soul like an orange, and never once letting that entity see a single crack. Most wizards think of occlumency as closing your mind. They think of it as a wall, but a wall is easy to knock down if you have enough power. For Severus Snape, occlumency was something far more sophisticated. It was a mental architecture. In Order of the Phoenix, Snape tries to teach Harry this art. He tells him to clear his mind of all emotion. But look at Snape himself. He isn't emotionless. He's bitter, he's sarcastic, he's focused. He didn't just build a wall, he built a labyrinth. To lie to Lord Voldemort, the greatest legilimens of history, Snape couldn't just hide his thoughts. He had to reorganize them. He had to create a surface consciousness that was entirely true to the Death Eater's perspective. He had to have a resentment of Dumbledore, a desire for power, and a hatred of Harry, while burying his true motivations, like his love of Lily and his loyalty to the light, so deep that they were essentially invisible to even himself. He performed an act of ego death. To protect the secret, Snape had to become a villain so convincingly that the most paranoid Dark Lord in history looked into his eyes and saw a reflection of himself. This isn't just magic, it's the highest form of psychological endurance. Let's talk about the stakes of that. Lord Voldemort is described as a wizard who almost always knows when someone is lying to him. He doesn't just read minds. He feels the fluctuations of truth. Now imagine standing in a graveyard or a cold manor house or the headmaster's office with those red eyes boring into you. Every time Snape reported to Voldemort, he was performing a high wire act over an abyss. One slip, one stray thought of Lily Evans, one moment of pity for a student, and he would be tortured and killed immediately. Snape operated under a cognitive load that would even have broken Dumbledore. Dumbledore had the luxury of being the great wise man. Voldemort, the luxury of being the tyrant. But Snape had to be both and neither. He had to navigate being a triple agent. He had to convince Voldemort he was spying on Dumbledore. He had to convince Dumbledore that he was spying on Voldemort. And in the final year, he had to convince the entire world he was a murderer, while secretly being the only thing standing between the students of Hogwarts and total annihilation. This is an impossible task. Snape's greatness isn't just that he succeeded, it's that he survived the solitude of that success. For 17 years, he had no one he could fully trust with the whole truth. Not even Dumbledore knew everything until the end. This leads us to the pensieve. In the Deathly Hallows, when Snape is dying, he gives Harry his memories. These memories give him a posthumous vindication, but look about what it reveals about his mental discipline. The memories that he gives Harry are precise, they're curated, and they're devastatingly clear. This tells us that Snape was a data manager. For years, he had been partitioning his own brain, deciding which memories were too dangerous to keep in his active mind, and which ones needed to be preserved as a proof of his mission. He lived his life like a black box recorder. Think about the mental strain of watching Dumbledore die by your own hand, and then having to go back to Voldemort and celebrate that death. Snape had to use his occlumency to compartmentalize his grief so it wouldn't contaminate his truth. Philosophically, this raises the question: if you spend your whole life pretending to be a monster, are you still a man? Snape's answer was the silver doe. His Patronus, the manifestation of his purest soul, never changed. Despite the mud, the blood, and the lies, he kept that one piece of himself unoccluded. He kept his core identity in cold storage of love that Voldemort, who cannot understand love, could never perceive, let alone find. We've talked about the wall Snape built. We've talked about the fortress of his mind. But every fortress has a heart, a central chamber where the most sacred thing is kept. In the wizarding world, the Patronus charm is the ultimate test of a soul. It requires you to pull a single, pure, happy memory from the depths of your being and give it a physical form. For most, this is a reflection of their own personality. A lion, a stag, a dog. But for Severus Snape, the Patronus wasn't a reflection of himself. It was a mirror of what he lost. When Snape cast that silver doe in Dumbledore's office, it is the most intellectually and emotionally charged moments of the entire saga. Dumbledore, a man who has seen everything, is genuinely shocked. After all this time, he asks, and Snape answers with a single word that has become the epitaph for his entire existence: always. Philosophically, this is the trope of static devotion. In a world of ever-changing monsters and shifting political tides, Snape's core motivation remained frozen in the moment he lost Lily Evans. His magic didn't evolve past her, it anchored itself to her. Think about the magical implications here. A Patronus usually changes only under the weight of a massive emotional upheaval. Nymphadora Tonks's Patronus changed into a wolf out of her love of Lupin. But Snape's Patronus didn't change to a doe. It remained a doe for nearly 20 years. This suggests that Snape lived every single day of his adult life in the immediate, raw presence of his greatest grief and his greatest love. He didn't move on. He didn't heal. He used his pain as his power. We have to look at the triple symmetry of the Potter-Snape-Evans triangle. James Potter's Patronus was a stag. Lily's was a doe. They were a pair, the king and queen of the forest. They matched. But Snape's Patronus is a doe. He didn't want to be the stag to her doe. He didn't want to possess her or even match her. By manifesting her exact Patronus, Snape was demonstrating a level of devotion that borders on the religious. He carried her soul within his own. This is what allowed him to lead Harry to the sword of Gryffindor in the Forest of Dean. He used the doe, the symbol of Harry's mother, to guide the boy. He didn't appear as himself. He didn't want the credit. He wanted the magic to be hers. This is the anonymous benefactor. He was acting as a ghost of the mother to protect the son of his rival. Now let's look at why this made him the greatest wizard in context of the war. Lord Voldemort, a man who had claimed to travel further than anyone along the path of immortality, had a fatal flaw: frequency of love. Voldemort understood power. He understood fear. He understood occlumency. But he could not conceive of a magic fueled by unrequited, lifelong grief. To Voldemort, Snape's always would have been a weakness to be exploited. But Snape turned that weakness into the ultimate invisibility cloak. Because Voldemort couldn't understand the motivation, he couldn't see the lie. He looked at Snape's Patronus, if he ever saw it, and he saw only a spell. He didn't see a confession. Snape's greatness lies in the fact he was able to take the most vulnerable human emotion, his love, and weaponize it into a shield that not even the most powerful dark wizard in history could pierce. He proved that Dumbledore was right. Love is a form of magic. But Snape proved that love is also a form of intelligence. It's a way of knowing the world that the logical and the cruel can never anticipate. Always isn't just a romantic sentiment. In the mouth of Severus Snape, it's a vow of eternal vigilance. It represents the crushing weight of a man who decided his life no longer belonged to him. He was merely a vessel for its memory. He was the guardian of a silver doe in a world of darkness. As we move into the final act of his life, we see that this always was the only thing that kept him standing when he had to face the three most powerful teachers at Hogwarts, when he had to play the villain one last time, and knowing that the only person who understood him was already dead. We've reached the endgame. The masks are falling, the castle is under siege, and Severus Snape, the man who has lived in the shadows for 17 years, is finally forced into the light. But this isn't a moment of glory, it's a moment of exquisite agony. Today we're going to look at the divergence between the page and the screen, about how both versions cement Snape as a tactical titan who was playing a game of chess while everyone else was playing checkers. In the book, The Deathly Hallows, the fall of the Carrows is a moment of Gryffindor catharsis. Harry Potter, hidden under his cloak, watches Amicus Carrow spit in Professor McGonagall's face. In that moment, Harry does something he's never done before. He casts a successful Cruciatus Curse. He tells Bellatrix Lestrange in his 5th year that you have to mean it, and in the Ravenclaw Tower, he finally does it. But where's Snape? In the book, Snape's greatness in this moment is invisible. He has spent the entire year acting as a buffer. He's allowed the Carrows to believe they're in charge, while secretly guiding the resistance. When he finally encounters McGonagall in the corridor, he isn't looking for a fight, he's looking for Harry. Snape is trying to fulfill his final vow to Dumbledore, to give Harry the truth, but he's blocked by the very woman he respects most. He has to defend himself against Minerva McGonagall, Phileas Flitwick, and Pomona Sprout without hurting them. Think about the magical scaling here. McGonagall is a master of transfiguration. Flitwick, a former dueling champion. Sprout is a master of the environment. Snape holds them off with superhuman speed, weaving through their spells like a shadow. He isn't trying to win, he's trying to survive. Now let's look at the film. The filmmakers took a different path, and in doing so, gave us one of the greatest secret agent moments in cinematic history. In the Great Hall, Snape stands before the students. McGonagall steps forward, shielding Harry, and she attacks. Watch the choreography. It's not just a duel. Snape doesn't fire a single offensive spell at Minerva. He blocks, He retreats. But look behind him. The Carrows, Amicus and Alecto, are standing there, wands drawn, ready to intervene. As McGonagall fires a stream of fire at Snape, he doesn't just shield it, he redirects it. With 2 precise flicks of his wand, movements so fast you might miss them, Snape deflects McGonagall's spells into the Carrows. He knocks them out using the magic of his enemy. In one sequence, he achieves 3 things. He neutralizes the Death Eaters, he maintains his cover, and he protects the students from the Carrows. And if you slow down that particular scene, he actually claims their wands as part of his escape. And then we have his exit. Both the book and the movie give us the same impossible feat, unsupported flight. Until this moment in the series, it was believed that you needed a tool to fly, a broom, a thestral, a carpet. Lord Voldemort was the first to break this rule, shocking the Order of the Phoenix during the Battle of the Seven Potters. By flying out the window without a broom, Snape is signalling his ascension. Philosophically, this represents a man who has moved beyond the crutches of magic. He's reached a level of elemental mastery that places him in a tier occupied only by Dumbledore and Voldemort. He has learned from the Master, yes, but he has also refined it. McGonagall calls him a coward as he flees. And here is a heart-wrenching irony. To be the hero, Snape must accept the label of a coward. He flies away not to save his life, but to save the mission. He has to stay alive long enough to die at the right time. We have to talk about the lethality handicap here, though. In the wizarding world, it is much easier to kill than incapacitate. And Avada Kedavra is a straight line. It requires no finesse, only hate. But to duel 3 masters, including a dueling champion like Flitwick, and ensure that no one gets hurt, that's the ultimate flex of magical superiority. If Snape were truly the villain everyone thought he was, the hallway would have been a graveyard. But because he was the half-blood prince, he had to fight with one hand tied behind his back. He had to be better than them to keep them safe from himself. Snape's greatness isn't found in how many people he defeated, but by how many people he didn't kill when he had every opportunity and every reason, at least in the eyes of the Death Eaters, to do so. As Snape tumbles out into the night, he's the loneliest man in the world. He has just been attacked by his colleagues. He's been renounced by his school. He's heading back to a master who was about to kill him. But in that duel, whether it was the book's frantic hallway skirmish or the movie's tactical masterclass, Snape proved that he was the greatest wizard of his age, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the most disciplined. He held the line, he protected the students, he neutralized the Carrows, and he did it all while being called a murderer by the people he was dying for. We followed the prince through the gutters of Spinner's End, the margins of a textbook, and the labyrinth of a 17-year lie. But now the shadows are receding. The sun is rising over a castle in ruins, and Severus Snape is running out of time. We've reached the final moment of the symphony. We're going to explore the moment the mask finally broke, and why the Prince's Tale is the most important chapter in the history of modern magic. Let's return to that hallway, or the Great Hall. Whether you're reading the book or watching the film, the Duel of the Masters is a masterclass in kinetic redirection. In the book, Snape is being pelted by McGonagall's conjured daggers, Flitwick's charms, or Sprout's plants. He's facing the heads of houses, the 3 most powerful wizards left in the castle. And yet the text tells us he's moving with a speed that's superhuman. Snape is the immovable object. He's doing something much harder than standing his ground. He's filtering their attacks. He's essentially using his colleagues' righteous fury as a weapon to prune the Death Eaters from the room. And now we move to the end. The Shrieking Shack in the books, the boathouse in the films. Snape is summoned by Voldemort. This is the moment where the triple agent role reaches its logical, tragic conclusion. Voldemort believes Snape is the master of the Elder Wand because Snape killed Dumbledore. It's the irony of the technicality. Voldemort, for all his power, is a literalist. He thinks magic is about blood and victory. He doesn't understand that Dumbledore's death was an act of mercy, not an act of murder. Because the intent was different, the wand never belonged to Snape. Snape knows this. As he stands before Voldemort, he knows he is about to die for a wand he doesn't own, to protect a boy he supposedly hates, for a woman who has been dead for 20 years. Voldemort's killing of Snape via Nagini is clinical. It's a business transaction. But for Snape, it's the ultimate release. The mask can finally come off because the mission is over. He needs to stay alive for 5 more minutes. He needs the boy. Harry Potter crawls to him, and Snape does something that is purely magical. He gives up his memories. This is the posthumous vindication trope taken to its absolute extreme. In the form of those silvery blue threads, Snape hands Harry the keys to the entire war. But look at the choice of the memories. The child, he shows Harry the boy who loved Lily Evans. He humanizes himself. The mistake, he shows the mudblood incident. He takes accountability for his own radicalization. The vow, he shows the moment where he went to Dumbledore to save her. The moment he chose the light. The burden, he shows the always moment and the silver doe. It's not just a data dump, it's an alchemical transmutation of perspective. By the time Harry pulls his head out of that pensieve, Severus Snape has transformed from a tiresome know-it-all bully to the primary architect of victory. Harry realizes that every time Snape insulted him, every time he bullied him, he was also keeping him alive. He was the mentor who played a role in the shadows as an antagonist, so Harry would be ready for the real thing. We have to talk about his final words. Look at me. In the books, he wanted to die looking into Lily's eyes, the green eyes Harry inherited. This is the redemptive gaze trope. For 17 years, Snape has avoided looking at Harry because those eyes were a constant source of pain, a reminder of his failure and his lost love. But in his final second, he seeks them out. He wants his last sight to be the light he spent his life trying to protect. Philosophically, this is Snape reclaiming his humanity. He stops being the spy, the headmaster, the potions master. He simply becomes Sev once again, the boy in love with Lily. And he dies, looking at the one thing that ever mattered to him. Voldemort dies alone, unloved and ignored. Snape dies in the arms of a boy he saved, looking into the eyes of a woman he loved. Even in death, Snape is the greater wizard because he understood the value of love. So, we've finally reached the end of the podcast. I'm just about to summarize why this is so important. Why does Snape matter? Why do I think he is the greatest wizard in the series? Snape matters because he proves that greatness isn't about purity. Snape was a flawed, bitter, and cruel man, but he used those flaws to build a fortress that no one could breach. He showed us that you don't have to be good to be great, you just have to be right. He was the dispossessed heir who rewrote the rules. He was the prince. When Harry later names his son Albus Severus, he is acknowledging that the wizarding world was not saved by a light hero, but by a man of the grey. A man who understood that sometimes you have to live in the dark so the light stays on. Severus Snape was the greatest wizard of the modern age, because he was the only one capable of doing the impossible. He lived a lie so perfect it became the truth. The Half-Blood Prince is gone, but in the margins of history, and in the hearts of those who look close enough, his spiky, cramped handwriting is still there. And that's the reason why I think that Snape is the greatest wizard. He was an innovator. He knew he had made the wrong choices, and he spent the rest of his life trying to make up for it, playing the most dangerous game that that had to be played to defeat the man who killed the woman he loved. He created spells. He understood the ability to craft potions unlike anything else. He wasn't about power. He wasn't about playing the game like Dumbledore did. He was about doing what needed to be done, and he did it in a way where he was able to see the whole game board for what it was. He used the knowledge he had, knowledge that Dumbledore didn't have or Voldemort didn't have, in order to find the victory that they needed. Thank you so much for joining me for the podcast today. I do realize that it was quite a long one, and there was a lot of content to explore in it. I do really, really enjoy doing these deep dives. It's something I'm very, very passionate about and something I really, really enjoy. So, next episode, we are jumping into Middle-earth and Lord of the Rings. We are going to be discussing the Bridge of Khazad-dûm and the conflict between the Balrog of Moria and Gandalf the Grey. A fallen Maya versus one of the greatest Istari. And we're going to explore Tolkien's Catholicism and the philosophy involved in that particular sequence. So, I hope you all enjoyed the episode today. I hope to see you all next time. And as always, stay shiny. Thanks, guys.